So you probably saw on the posters out front, or if you looked at the Eventbrite or any of the stuff that has been publicized in this event, that we did have a fourth writer, Christine Lee, who unfortunately could not be with us tonight. But I wanted to mention her because what I'm going to read tonight probably would not exist without her. She is, among other things, she's a wonderful writer, but also is an editor at The Rumpus, which is a great journal if you don't know it. And she sent out a call for submissions a few months ago asking for essays about motherhood. And I am mostly a fiction writer, but I do some nonfiction here and there. So I'm actually not going to read fiction tonight. I'm going to read an essay that I wrote. And I'm going to start about halfway through, because it's too long to share the whole thing tonight. But this is an essay in which I compare motherhood to the 9 circles of hell in Dante's Inferno. So this is, as I said, about halfway through an essay called Motherhood Defective. Friends had told me that having children would give me a new respect for my body. But in the months after I stopped nursing my daughter, I committed maternal heresy and despised the body motherhood had given me. I loathed my breeder's gut and shriveled breasts. I couldn't look in the mirror without feeling disgust. It was impossible to pretend that I was the person I had once been. My house was no longer spotlessly clean. The gourmet meals that had once occurred nightly now had been reduced to special occasions. Everything was delivered to my doorstep. My hair was always in a ponytail. And just under the surface of every interaction was a quiet wrath, a black sulkiness that threatened to erupt. But my kids were in preschool 3 days a week, and I was writing again. I felt both grief and relief every time I told them goodbye. One of my friends, the kind who would tell me the truth, wondered aloud if maybe we should stop at 2 kids. It was sound advice. Our kids already had to share a room. I was clearly overwhelmed. Another friend who didn't have kids suggested that we purchase carbon offsets. We had a boy and a girl, should have been enough. I still can't explain why it wasn't. Perhaps it was the fear that one of them would die and be left alone, or that I was a third kid myself and wanted to right old wrongs. I only know that though life was full and horrible and happy every day, our family did not feel complete. Once again, I got pregnant. I never assumed that my pregnancies would be fine. I was 37, old enough not to be naive about such things. But when my 9-week ultrasound showed a tiny fetus stuck at 6 weeks with no heartbeat, I didn't understand. I felt pregnant. My nausea and fatigue were always bad first trimester, and this time was no different. I scheduled a D&C and then canceled it the next day. I went in 2 weeks later, just to make sure I hadn't gotten the date wrong. But the little blob was still there, stuck in early death. There was no bleeding, no relief from the morning sickness that should have meant everything was okay. No sign that this baby would leave my body. That day, I fell into a stone-cold violence that came from within and without. Moments after my OB-GYN appointment, I got news that a close friend's father, a pastor at our church, and the epitome of a man at peace with God and the world, had just died of pancreatic cancer a month after his diagnosis. The next morning, I learned that a beloved high school friend who had been a light to me in a dark season had committed suicide. The day of the first funeral, I brought dinner to my friends who'd lost their father. As I was leaving, I noticed that the back of my shorts was soaked in blood. No one else saw. I had a towel stashed in the trunk that I sat on as I drove home. I went to bed, cramped with the pains of early labor. All night, I returned to the bathroom again and again, each time expelling a fist of red tissue. I don't know what my dead baby looked like because I flushed it down the toilet. Sometime around 2 a.m., I tried to get into the shower. I was covered in blood, but something inside me shattered. And then I was on the bathroom floor, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to see, even though the light was on overhead. Eventually, my husband found me there, helped me in the shower where I lay paralyzed, the water pouring over me. He called an advice nurse who threatened low hemoglobin, body going into shock, imminent death. We didn't want to call an ambulance because it was too expensive. We didn't want to wake our children, who were sleeping soundly in their room. Finally, we found a friend who slept with her phone on, who dozed on our couch while my husband dropped me off at the ER. I was fine in the end. I could have died, but the high levels of iron in my blood saved me. The ER visit cost us over $4,000. I couldn't help feeling some regret that we hadn't just chanced it and stayed home. A friend picked me up from the ER the next morning. She bought me a breakfast burrito and a cup of coffee and told me about her own miscarriage. I went home and slept all day. Another friend brought me dinner and told me about her miscarriage, 10 years before, but still tender to recall. It turned out that most of the women I knew had had miscarriages. Some of them had had several. When I Googled the statistics, I saw that 1 in every 3 pregnancies ends this way. Now, this should have been the point where I got better, where I let myself grieve and heal and move on. Well-meaning acquaintances told me to be grateful for the children I had. I tried. My OB-GYN told me that we should wait a few months. We marked the calendar. The weeks dragged on. For 9 months, I bled erratically, a new weakness in me symbolizing what I had known all along. I was broken, not cut out for motherhood, barren even as I cared for the 2 children I had. I did all the things I was supposed to do. I ran, I meditated, I prayed, I sought the company of friends, but I felt like a fraud. I was an empty tomb of a person. I found my depression utterly boring. I felt abandoned by my friends, even as they tried to support me, for it is not easy to love a hopeless person. And I did lose hope. After 9 months, my husband and I stopped trying for another baby. My daughter turned 2 a few weeks after the lost baby would have been born. I was stunned at the intensity of my grief, amazed that it could hurt so much so many months later, and that I somehow loved and missed this baby that I had never known. Around the same time, I got a landslide of responses from agents about the novel I'd written and taken through 16 drafts while I was raising my kids. All of them were thoughtful, encouraging, devastating rejections. I tried and failed to be grateful, patient, kind. I was at the depths of my own personal hell, not burning in flames as I thought, but dead, frozen. Only the duty to care for my kids kept me from turning my back on the land of the living. I was incapable of following through on any task I started, howlingly lonely, though I was rarely alone. I had never dared to look full on at the face that was truly mine, and when I finally did, I saw a puffy-eyed little girl whose anger masked her pain, who was not fit to care for anyone, least of all herself. I went on antidepressants and started counseling, liquidating our savings. I kept telling my kids I loved them, asking their forgiveness every time I did it wrong. I kept writing, though my writing accolades had long ago lost their shine. One day, I told my therapist that I'd finally faced the possibility that I might never make it as a writer, and found that it didn't really matter. It was the way I lived. I could no more stop being a writer than I could stop being a mom. There was nothing else I wanted to do. She called it radical acceptance. I nodded, accepted this is true. That summer, I started having trouble sleeping. I lost my appetite. I felt strange in my body. If I didn't know better, I'd think I was pregnant, I told my husband. He laughed because we barely had sex for months. I took a pregnancy test just to be sure. It was positive. I took another, 2 blue lines again. I called my doctor, asked her what to do. I still had hard days, but I was doing better. I went off the antidepressants cold turkey. I had several days of headaches and low energy, but a week passed, and my body felt better than it had in months. I felt like I was carrying a miracle. For 9 months, I waited for the other shoe to drop, for there to be something wrong with this 4th baby. Every time I turned on the radio, it was police brutality, mass shootings, white supremacy. I fretted about the world this child would be born into, what I would say about how we'd gotten to this place. In my last week of pregnancy, I got rejections from the last few agents I've been waiting on. I thought about what it meant to be writing, to be mothering. I felt stripped to the bone, exposed. The weight of all that I was supposed to be, all that I had hoped to be, had finally come crashing down. It felt like giving up, or maybe like letting go. 2 days before Valentine's Day, my baby was born perfect into a broken world. We named her Matea, gift of God, Coretta, after Coretta Scott King. She was a beam of sunshine who laughed her way into the world. Her siblings lugged her around like a baby doll, and she gleefully complied as they put her in laundry baskets and blew kisses onto her tummy. For the first time since I became a mother, I made no grand plans, no marathons, no lofty book goals. I worked on a new novel on the days when my kids were in school. I wrote a paragraph a day, read poetry, stood on one leg to practice my balance. I tickled the baby. I tried to make my kids laugh. They taught me how to play. I know a guy who has devoted his life's work to helping people discover their calling, something deeper than your profession, the thing you'll do all your life because it propels you forward. I've always been clear on my calling to write, and less clear on my calling to rear children. Writing and mothering always seem to be in competition, one at the expense of the other. Maybe that's why, just as I'd known before Matea's birth that I wanted another child, I immediately felt satisfied that she was my last. Maybe there's an allotted space inside me for this particular struggle. Maybe 3 kids is what I can manage while living in the tension of being a mother and a writer. It's a tension I still feel every day. Today, my children are 6, 4, and 1. I am officially one of those crazy moms I used to shake my head at. But I'm surprised to realize that I don't mind. Most days, there's scads of kids running in and out of our house. It turns out my tolerance for kid chaos is high. It no longer bothers me to sit in front of an infant on the airplane. I do many of the gross things I swore I would never do, like eat my kids' leftovers and change my baby's diaper on the park bench and pull my boob out in public. When I see a mom speak sharply to her kids, I give her the benefit of the doubt, because I know she's tired. But I also have a better understanding of the young woman I once was, whose fear of failure was so palpable that she convinced herself not to try. My younger self was not wrong in thinking that motherhood would be a descent into the underworld. It has taken me to the depths of myself in a way that nothing else has. At the bottom is a mirror that magnifies everything ugly and selfish and broken in me. What I didn't expect is that facing my demons would also push me to accept the most tender, true, and hopeful parts of myself, that something more than death could come from ashes. Much to my great amazement, I'm a good mom, and also sometimes a terrible one. Every day is a tenuous balance between adoring my kids and wanting to kill them. I would lay myself on the tracks of life for them, even when they make me crazy. They make up my short list of favorite people. But I'm also daily mourning the writing I'm not doing. I still haven't published a book. I'll never know if this is because my attention has been diverted toward my kids or in spite of that. What I do know is that the spark that fuels my writing, exploring, trying to surprise, attempting to understand, is the best thing I bring to parenting. And the reverse is also true, though it's not always obvious. Some of the best things in my writing have come from my kids. Delight in the world, attention to detail, the way a person can be both simple and endlessly complex. Every day I look at my children and I think, this is hard, and I choose you. I long to be writing more. And I have no regrets about this path, no bitterness about the sacrifice. I'm still writing, still hoping that my words will make a difference. I'll keep writing them anyway.